Canadian-Israeli philanthropist Sylvan has made headlines in the past few years, bringing here such international sporting events as the Giro d'Italia cycling race, a Formula One racing exhibition, and even such performers as Madonna. But he made the news recently with his efforts not to bring someone here, but to bring out of Afghanistan members of that nation's women's national biking team who faced a dim and potentially dangerous future there under Taliban rule. But that doesn't mean that Adams is done with his passion to put Israel on the global sporting map, revealing in a recent conversation with I-24 News that his future projects include a bid for the 2030 World Cup Soccer Championship that would be hosted by Israel, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. Here's that full interview. Sylvan Adams, thank you for joining us again on I-24 News.
Pleasure to be here with you, Calev, today.
Now, Sylvan, you're always involved in the most really interesting philanthropic activities. We'll talk more on those later. When I first heard of your involvement in sponsoring the rescue of Afghan civilians, I did think, well, that's something of a departure. But when I heard more about the story about who was being rescued, then I said, no, that's very much in line with especially your sporting interests. Talk about how you became involved.
So, as you know, I'm involved in the sport of cycling and quite well known. And I was contacted by a journalist who had interviewed me a few years ago, actually at the Giro here in Israel, and who knew of some of my activities in humanitarian works. And she knew someone who had worked very closely with the Afghan women's cycling team, the national team. And of course, with the Taliban running over the entire country, these poor girls were terrified. And so they were reaching out, and they asked, and I guess they were reaching out to a number of people, and they asked if I had any contacts either in Israel or in Canada that could help. And so I said, look, I don't know. I'll have to check. It's not something I'd ever done before. You know, rescuing people in a what is effectively a closed totalitarian society. And so I started reaching out, and I quickly came across an absolutely terrific Israeli NGO called IsraAid.
Right, sure.
Now, you probably know what IsraAid does.
Right, we've done interviews with them and articles on their work and their aid work around the world.
Yeah, so they usually get involved in earthquakes and things of this nature. But so this was a little bit of out of the box for them as well. But they said they could get operatives on the ground in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, and they're brilliant and capable CEO, Yotam Politzer. I said, listen, Yotam, whatever it takes, I've got this covered financially. So we went to work. We went to work.
Well, financial is one thing, but there was also then just arranging the international contacts for the flight to get them out, get them in transit, and then get them to their final destination.
Right. So again, using my international contacts, firstly in Canada. Canada announced very generously that it would accept 20,000 Afghan refugees, which number was then up to 40,000. So we were able to get, through my contacts, I was able to get a comfort letter from the immigration minister that was sufficient, because anyway, there was a whole bunch of cloak and dagger. We ended up, we were at the airport, then that terrorist incident happened where 180 or so people were killed, and then the flight that they were supposed to be on to Germany, that everything got canceled, and so we decided, Yotam and I, in discussions, we decided we're going to try a different route and take them over to a land crossing, and we brought them to the border, and again, the country that we were crossing into required some understanding that these Afghans would only be there for 24 hours. They didn't want them to stay any longer. They didn't want to be inundated with that. With this is their neighbor, and so we were able to get a comfort letter from Canada that was satisfactory. And there was a lot of cloak and dagger. I mean, at one point, they had literally Taliban rifles trained at them at the border without permission to walk into the neighboring country. I'm not at liberty to say which country because we want to keep that corridor open. And I made a phone call to somebody else that I know who actually knows the president of that country, who had done big projects in that country, and I said, listen, you need to call the president now. Our girls are in danger, and he did it. And minutes later, they were walking to safety across the bridge into this country.
And then made the flight to Canada.
No, and they made the flight to the UAE.
To the UAE, a transfer, and then.
And now they're making their refugee application. It's Canada, unfortunately, is quite bureaucratic, and we don't know how long it's going to take. I'm applying considerable influence in Canada to try to speed up the process, because it's not very humane to say we're opening our doors and then have them languish in a transit country. So the first group went to the UAE. Our second group, a larger group, the first group was 42, and then we had a group of 123. For a total, if my math is correct, of
167,
167,
with the total number.
Went to Albania.
Okay, well, Godspeed to that. They'll make their final destination, and thank you for that. I do want to now move to your more usual philanthropic endeavors, and which is also bringing some premier sporting events to Israel. You mentioned the Giro, for example. Now, you recently shared a stage with the head of FIFA, Gianni Infantino, in which he talked about what many may seem an impossible dream, bringing a World Cup to Israel. And then even describing maybe that if it's too much for Israel, the idea of co-hosting with another country, as the North American countries are going to be doing. Are you involved in that? Is it even realistic to talk about it at this point?
So the answer, of course, I'm involved in anything that has to do with large-scale events coming to Israel. I'm involved in.
Okay.
And I was at a gala dinner with Infantino, the FIFA president, and we discussed this subject at length. And it's too big for Israel to do on its own. Also, we don't need to spend that kind of money. We're not Qatar that can just build 20 soccer stadiums at once. We don't. And what will we do with them afterwards? So the idea we're discussing. And I'll give you an interesting scoop, which is we would do it with three other neighbors, which are Egypt, the UAE, and I'm going to surprise you, Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia. Well, that would be a peace World Cup for sure.
So this is my mantra, that sport can be a bridge towards relationships, and dare I say even friendships. With our neighbors, and it can change the whole paradigm in this region and around the world, and so that's why I sports, cultural events, all of these things are a way for us to build bridges and do really exciting things.
Sports can go to places politics and diplomacy can't yet. I do want to ask you briefly, because you are involved, that of course is years off, but you're involved in bringing a sporting event to Israel in the months to come. Could you talk briefly about that?
So yes, a couple of sporting events that we're hosting. The Ironman, the first time Ironman has been here in Israel, and we're starting with a half Ironman, and next starting
the triathlete, swimming, bicycling, and marathoning, I guess you could say.
And Ironman is the I guess the marquee brand of the sport of triathlon, and we're starting with a half Ironman in Tiberias, based in Tiberias, and we've signed for 5 additional years to do the full Ironman in Tel Aviv for the subsequent years.
Okay, when will that be in Tiberias?
So in Tiberias is November the 12th.
All right, well, that's going to be exciting to see.
And we have something else the following month, December the 11th, we have something called the Track Champions League, which is track cycling in the velodrome in Tel Aviv. And there are a series of 6 races with the best track riders in the world, the 96 best track riders in the world. And we are hosting the grand finale where there will be double points issued and the champion crowned. So we're around the world, you know, beaming to, as I say, hundreds and hundreds of millions of television sets and showing our good name and our good face around the world. I'll just end by
saying, Sylvan Adams, if you will it, the World Cup in Israel and some of the surrounding countries may not be a dream.
Yeah, well, listen, it's a big deal. It is a big deal. It'll be the biggest thing we've ever hosted. And I'm really confident because Gianni Infantino likes the idea, and he committed to working on our bid together to make it happen.
Well, hopefully then that will come to fruition. Thank you again for joining us.